one key aspect for a lot of people is getting into the housing market. A parliamentary committee released its report last week. It put forward a number of ideas, including the contentious one of allowing people to access their superannuation, not to dip into it, but use the equity to be able to get into the market. To look more at this, I spoke a short time ago with the head of research at CoreLogic, Tim Lawless. We began by talking about one of the age-old problems with housing in Australia, the pressure of demand for more dwellings and more density as a result.
We know that Australia has been densifying over time, but more so in major cities like Sydney and Melbourne, to a lesser extent markets like Brisbane. But at the other end of the spectrum, you've got markets like Perth, for example, which have really spread north and south, very LA style in their detached housing, very much not densifying. But I know as part of one of the recommendations of the recent inquiry into affordability and housing supply, it is one of the key recommendations is that we do need to densify as a country, but especially in strategic areas, which essentially means along transport spines, close to major working nodes like the CBD, hospitals, universities, that type of thing, which I think makes a lot of sense.
So on one side, you've got to have people have that mindset shift, I suppose, and we'll see if that happens, but it has to happen in planning. And I suppose the crucial element there is high density arrangements people actually want to live in. And you do see more and more these days, apartment complexes that have these nice areas that you can use shared amenities, but ones that still feel like they're yours to use.
And that is so important, as we do see our cities densifying, having that community space, parkland that's available for higher density residents to utilise, but also even broader than that is ensuring there is some protection for the broader housing form. We always see a lot of opposition from local communities when we are seeing plans looking to densify. A lot of people call it NIMBYism. But chances are, if we do see the government offering up incentives, such as increased amenity, increased convenience, for example, for local residents, as well as some protection for housing form, then I think we will see much less opposition to what's likely to be a natural progression towards high densities.
Right, yeah, like a new complex comes with a brand new park everyone can use, I guess. The other issue when it comes to, you mentioned planning and so on, is this is a federal government inquiry that's kicked off this latest conversation, and it talks a lot about state and council planning issues, basically saying it's not our fault, states and councils here are mainly responsible for this. Do you agree? Is that fair enough?
I think it's a fair enough assessment of the recommendations, absolutely. And the federal government are, I suppose, trying to take a role in offering up some guidance or framework for the state and the local governments to operate in. On top of that, also adding some incentives in the form of, or at least recommending, grants or funding for states or local governments that do the right thing, that try to make their planning regimes more streamlined and more efficient, where we do see higher densities and land being utilised for the highest and best use. Obviously, providing incentives in the form of dollars comes with some strings attached. And that's another thing we've seen in the recommendations, is they want to make sure that any funding is conditional on outcomes, rather than previously where funding's been provided and generally there isn't any conditions on how it's actually used or what sort of outcomes are determined.
The debate over the past couple of years has been around using super to get your first home. This suggests a bit of a change to that. Accessing super's equity, so super goes as your guarantee, you don't actually have to exit it from your account to be able to get into the market as a first home buyer. Is that a good sort of compromise?
I think it is, actually, and historically I've always been a little bit sceptical of access to super as an in to housing, mostly because it's a demand side incentive that would potentially increase demand and push up prices. So importantly, the recommendations have accompanied this suggestion with the provision that it needs to be accompanied by a commensurate increase in supply levels at the same time. We know that superannuation is a key vehicle for retirement wealth, but so is housing. I think that this is why it's so important that households do have access to their super, indirectly at least in this recommendation, is it gives them the opportunity for home ownership and build their wealth through housing, which helps prepare them for retirement.
Yeah, the best asset you can have with our current rules, and maybe they can be changed with our current rules, is having your own home, of course. Just finally and quickly, rent to build. Yes, many people want to buy their own home, but for those that don't, they might want to travel a lot and so on. This essentially means you move into somewhere, and because it's a build-to-rent scheme, you don't have to move out for someone that's coming back to live in that house. That gives someone some real solidarity to live there as long as they want.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing this sector of the housing industry really gathering pace now. Historically, it's really been hamstrung by a whole bunch of factors like very low yields, an inappropriate taxation environment for developers, high land costs, all factors that still need to be addressed. And we're seeing a lot of, I guess, fractions from state to state now in how they handle and treat some of these barriers. So states like Victoria and New South Wales now seem to be quite well ahead of the game, offering up incentives for institutional investors to get into the build-to-rent program. And we're definitely seeing a lot more developers taking advantage of that.
All right, well, we've got some ideas. We always like debating policy. We'll see where they go in this election cycle. But Tim Lawless, thanks for your time.
Good to chat, Tom.